Do y'all like gay shit? Is this a safe place for homosexuality? Okay, good, because I love me some gay shit. Now, we've watched quite a few movies starring heterosexuals. We watched one about a woman who got kidnapped by a mafia boss who, of course, she fell in love with, as you do. Then we saw one about a child who falls in love with an ancient vampire who is obsessed with her, which, of course, is very well adjusted and incredibly healthy. And romantic. Then we watched one about a woman who falls in love with a baby-faced billionaire who is obsessed with her and also just happens to be obsessed with beating women who look exactly like his mother. And you know, a lot of women love these stories, and I had to argue with several of them in the comment section of every one of these videos. But if you've seen any of my reviews, you know that I was not a huge fan of those movies, but I am a fan of that good gay shit. Like, for a lot of women who have watched any of the movies that I just talked about, they were watching it while getting like simultaneously giggly and like giddy about all of the things happening on screen. But I watch it and I just feel absolutely nothing. Like, it doesn't hit the way that good gay shit hits. Like, if I'm ever watching a show and I get the inkling that a character is gay, they become like the most interesting character to me. I'm really not that excited about heterosexual pairings, but like gay pairings, nothing makes me like blush and giggle more. Like, I'll never forget when I was watching The 100 and like Lexa and Clark. I'm not even a lesbian, but like, just love to see it. If I'm ever playing one of those choose your own adventure kind of games, I always make the characters gay. Recently, I was watching The Witcher with my boyfriend, and you guys know where this is going. When Jaskier started hitting on Radovid, I was like, oh my God, like, they're gay. And it just, I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but like, gay characters are always like so much more interesting. I'm always significantly more invested in their romance. And so when people kept talking about this new Amazon movie, Red, White, and Royal Blue, I was ready for that good gay shit. And if you're familiar with LGBT representation, or let's be real, more commonly queer baiting, you know that a lot of LGBTQIA plus adjacent stories do not end well. And what I heard about this film is that it ended with a happy ending. So I was pretty excited to at least check out this film to see what all of the, you know, hubbubaloo is. Now, this is one of those movies that like everybody in my feed is talking about. I can't go on Instagram once without hearing about the missionary scene, which we'll get to. But because at least on my side of the internet, people have received this movie very well, I wanted to check it out for myself. But you know, this is like a movie about like the government or whatever. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't really excited to hear about the son of a president or like the prince, you know, from the UK or whatever. I don't really be loving the government. You know, me and the government, we don't really, you know, we not that close, you know? And I guess my first thought is like, it seemed a little propaganda adjacent, you know? It seems a little propaganda-y. But I wanted to give it a view, and I wanted to give it a review, and I wanted to talk about how this film has been received by the public and so many more things relating to this particular project. So let's talk about Red, White, and Royal Blue. So as you guys know already, every time I do one of these reviews, I go over the plot. You guys should be used to this by now. I'm going to spoil it for you by summarizing the plot for you, because I think that is worth talking about as we dive into our criticisms. So if you don't want to hear the plot, skip ahead. If you are okay with hearing the plot, stay with me. The film starts in a very classic rom-com way with a wedding, and it is a royal wedding between, I believe it's Prince Philip, I don't remember that guy's name, and his wife, whose name I also don't remember nor care to remember. But the important characters here are Prince Henry, who is the brother of the prince who's currently getting married, and the president's son, Alex Claremont Diaz. I have my notes right here, so I got that correct. Now, Alex and Henry do not like each other. They had one interaction at a party forever ago, and they don't like each other. Alex doesn't like Henry because he thinks that Henry is basically up his own ass, and Henry doesn't like Alex because he thinks that he is too lowbrow. And so they have a clash at the royal wedding, which naturally leads to them falling into the very, very expensive wedding cake that they have spent the entire first portion of the movie making clear was far, far, far too overpriced. So this apparently becomes an international scandal. And the president, his mother, who is played by Uma Thurman, and by the way, yeah, the president is a woman in this movie. That's fucking awesome. I love when my imperialists are like diverse, you know what I mean? So it's really cool that like she's a woman or whatever. But anyway, she and the president's team really need for him to get on a better term with Henry after this. Apparently she's up for re-election and they don't want international relations going the way that they go. And so they mutually on both sides, on both the president's side and on the prince's side, agreed to essentially do a long media campaign that demonstrates how close and how friendly they are with each other. And so they go on several different interviews and they even go and, see sick children in the hospital or whatever. And it's actually there that they have their first time where they're sort of pushed together. They think that there's an active shooter and they push both of them into the closet. And that's where Henry asks Alex, "Why don't you like me?" And apparently it was because he overheard Henry speaking negatively about him at a party and has held a grudge ever since, which, bitch, that's exactly how I am. It's like, if you're shady, like, I'm not going to hold a grudge, but like, if I feel like you don't like me, like, I'm not going to like be friendly towards you, or I will. Sometimes it's confusing. Sometimes I'll get like really friendly to be like annoying. But anyway, Henry apologizes to Alex for his statements and they start to begin having more of a positive interaction. When Alex goes back to the United States, they're texting back and forth, and some of these texts are kind of flirtatious. They start to interact in a more positive way. And I really enjoyed the way that they filmed this. They did this thing where even though they're both far away, they portray them as being in the same room. And I just thought that was really interesting. I have been really fascinated by the way that we've portrayed texting in film. And in my opinion, this was actually one of the better ways that they did it, where you're texting each other, but it's really clear that there's an intimate relationship that's building from these texts, and showing them in the same room, even though they're not interacting with each other, is, I think, a really great way to do that. Alex is starting to become disenchanted with his role as the president's son. He's just kind of expected to like go on these tours and to make the president look good. And he wants to really start doing something that gives him purpose. So he pens this internal memo about how his mother can win their home state of Texas and gives it to her, but she ignores it. Earlier in the film, we're introduced to a character named Miguel, and Miguel is a journalist who apparently at some point Alex had a intimate relationship with. And it's clear that this is a conflict of interest, and it's clear that Miguel is kind of frustrated by the fact that it didn't turn into more. Alex invited Henry to his New Year's party and he showed up. When Henry comes to the party, it's very clear that he's sort of not used to letting loose like that. He doesn't really vibe with the sort of partying that he's doing. He's just really there to interact with Alex because, he's got a big crush because, they gay or whatever. Sorry. And this part of the film, I was giggling. This was like the giggle part for me. I was like, oh my God, like, what are they going to do? And then, so of course, Alex ends up kissing some girls for his New Year's moment. And this really bothers Henry, right? Because clearly he's crushing or whatever. And so Henry storms out of the party. And Alex goes to find him and asks him what is wrong. And it's at that moment when Henry pulls him in for a very intimate kiss, a confusing kiss that he doesn't really know what to do with. And then he ends up like walking away to like break the tension of this kiss that he wasn't expecting. And from this point forward, after the party, Henry would essentially ghost him. So Alex is in a very interesting position. He confesses to his friend Nora that he's only really been with a few guys before, Miguel being one of them and maybe some people in school before that. But he's interested in Henry and doesn't exactly know what to do with the emotions and the feelings, especially because he is the president's son. And attached to that, of course, is a certain image that he has to uphold. Again, that's kind of one of the only responsibilities he has as a president's son. So the White House has another event, and Alex really, really wants for Henry to show up. So he's really, really nervous about whether or not he's going to be there. As he's sort of scanning the room looking for Henry, Miguel walks up to him and tries to have a conversation with him about the memo that he wrote. He said that he had looked over it and he really liked some of the ideas that he had. And he's obviously saying this to Alex because he's interested in him. And Alex doesn't even really look at him. So Prince Henry does eventually show up, and when he does, Alex walks over to him and says that he would really like to talk to him. So the Secret Service opens up a little room where they go and have a conversation. And by conversation, I mean, they was tongue wrestling. They was tongue tossing, doing whatever they need to do with their tongues. And bitch, it was steamy. It was steamy as hell. So after they do what they do, they start having a conversation about what is this? Where is this going to go? And they're both very nervous about being open about it. So they decide to keep it very, very casual. And Alex also shares that he is bisexual. He is attracted to women, but he is also attracted to men. Meanwhile, Henry clarifies that he is very gay. Henry invites Alex to come to Paris to watch him play polo, which sounds incredibly boring with the exception of it being in Paris. I might could, especially if you're buying, especially if you're paying for the plane ticket. Girl, I'll come watch you play polo. So of course, Alex comes to Paris and they have a very, very, very emotional woohoo session. It is, girl, this was the scene everybody was talking about. They are very emotional and close, and it's clear that they are leaning a bit more into I like you territory. It's all very, very romantical. And they got a hotel room that's right in front of the Eiffel Tower. I'm just saying, if I'm getting flued out, it's at that hotel with that view and truly nothing less. I'll give you some woohoo if you know what it is. After they do what they do, they have a conversation about what sort of person they would be if they were not in the position they were in. If they didn't have to worry about their relationship being secret, what kind of relationship would they have? When Alex gets back to the United States, it's revealed that Miguel, or somebody else, it's obviously Miguel, apparently released the internal memo that he wrote about Texas, and his mother is incredibly upset about it. Like I said, this is a re-election year for her, so she really doesn't want any controversy, and apparently the fact that this was released is a potential controversy. And it's pretty obvious that Miguel only released this internal memo because he had moved on and wasn't responding to his flirtation. This internal memo leaking apparently inspires his mother to actually read it. And it turns out that she really likes a lot of his ideas. And so Alex becomes an official part of her re-election campaign. He goes to Texas and he finally starts to have a little bit of purpose in his life. Meanwhile, through it all, he is still remaining in contact with Henry and sending him a bunch of letters about all of the things that he's going through, but he makes it clear that he really, really misses him. Alex flies to New York to give a huge speech about his mother being reelected, and apparently Henry decides to show up and appreciate the speech and so many other things. When he gets back to his hotel, Miguel is waiting at the hotel bar for him, and Alex clearly doesn't want to talk to him. He's very pissed that he did what he did, and he wants nothing to do with him. When Henry eventually arrives at the hotel, Alex turns around and walks with him up to his hotel room, which of course makes Miguel quite suspicious. They have another amazing bombastic love session, and in the morning, they get caught by a woman working on his mother's campaign. And it's this that causes him to eventually have a conversation with his mom about being bisexual. And his mom is so accepting and so chill. She's like, you want to get on Truvada? We got all types of things. And if you're a bottom, she's just like the pinnacle of like the most accepting mother ever. And it was kind of cool to see, I guess, that depiction of like a president who could have a gay child who is incredibly accepting. At the end of the conversation, she makes it incredibly clear that she loves him, that she accepts him, but she makes him promise to tell his father. They all go on vacation in Texas, and Henry comes along. And while Henry is performing karaoke, it becomes incredibly clear that Alex is in love with him. And he starts looking at him very, very fondly. And he clearly wants to confess his love to him. So they're both sitting out in the middle of the lake. And Alex decides that he wants to confess his love for Henry. And before Henry even hears the phrase, "I love you," he jumps in the water, swims to the shore, gets in a car, and flies back to the UK, once again ghosting him. So then Alex decides to get on a plane and fly all the way to the UK to confront Prince Henry. And when he does, Henry makes it clear that the reason why he ran away was because he feels like there's no way for him to actually be in this relationship because he has to be closeted because of the expectation of the prince. And so Alex comes to a compromise. It's clear that they both love each other, but Alex is willing to go as slow as Prince Henry is going to require when it comes to being out about their relationship. But unfortunately, they don't get an opportunity to actually tell it on their own terms because Prince Henry gets hacked and all of the messages between them are exposed. And of course, Miguel is the person who is behind the outing, and he's doing a media tour talking about all of their relationship. Henry obviously is mortified. He is really, really struggling with being outed. But Alex decides to hold a press conference where he very confidently states out loud in public that he loves Prince Henry, that he's not ashamed of being in love with Prince Henry, and that he's going to continue being in a relationship with him. Back in England, the king is having a conversation with Prince Henry about what his responsibilities are as a prince. And it's pretty clear that he wants Henry to remain in the closet because of how it's going to make the entire royal family look. But while they're having this conversation, there's crowds that are building all around the palace and all around England of people cheering on Prince Henry's new relationship. And once Prince Henry sees how accepting everyone is of their relationship, he decides that he no longer wants to be closeted. Back in the United States, despite all of the controversy, Alex's mother manages to get reelected to the presidency. And it's kind of insinuated, though it's not exactly clear, that Prince Henry flies back to the United States to be in a relationship with Alex, and I believe they decide to move into the vacation home in Austin, Texas. And they all lived happily ever after. The president got reelected, and now there's an openly gay member of the British monarchy. So that is Red, White, and Royal Blue, and as I'm sure you can already piece together, there's a lot to be said about this film, its contents, and its themes. So let's get into it. I'm going to start by saying this. It's a movie that has the quality of a CW TV show. And I have to remind myself that I have been watching all types of queer cinema for a very long time. Because my first thought when I saw this was like, I feel like I've seen something like this already. It's not that like groundbreaking, right? But I have to remind myself that this is a film that was greenlit by Amazon Studios, which is kind of a big deal. even if it didn't get a massive theater release, it is still really awesome that there are mainstream companies making gay films, because quite a few LGBT films that I'm familiar with were not produced by large companies or with the backing of large companies. They were independent films created by people who were really desperate to see themselves represented in film. And so it is kind of cool to see that they were able to throw their money behind a gay story and produce something of passable quality. But that all being said, I think this was one of those situations where, because I heard so many positive things on social media, I expected to be blown away, but I really was not. Now, something that I did find really refreshing and interesting was that they do actually show, at least through the way that they're filming it, intimate acts between two men. This was a really funny movie because the first part of it felt kind of CW, and then there's certain areas that feel very HBO. 35 minutes into the film, they're talking about people getting dick down and things. I was oh, okay. Because it could just, if they excluded all of those things, it would just be kind of your regular CW show where you wouldn't actually see these two men be intimate in ways that make it very clear what they're doing. But in this, it is really clear. In fact, one of the major things that kept popping up into my feed is apparently people being surprised that two men can have missionary sex. Y'all need to get out more. Of course, two men can have missionary sex. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to, but whatever. This project had big stars like Stephen Fry and Uma Thurman, and I think that that's kind of worth celebrating. There's a lot of queer films that we celebrate now that have people in them that turned out to be big stars, but quite frequently at the time when they did these movies, they were not mainstream actors, right? A lot of times that's how some of them got their first big break, right? Being in these strange queer films. So it's kind of cool to see these more established actors decide to take on projects like this. This is a film where you see two men fall in love and survive the plot, and I think that's worth celebrating. But it still, for me, kind of felt, it felt kind of stale, I guess. Yes, there were cute, giggly moments. There are things that I really enjoyed and thought were, a good time or whatever, but I didn't really understand why so many people were acting like it was one of the most amazing films of the year. I mean, I think this film was the top streaming film on Amazon, and it's just, in comparison to a lot of things that I've seen, just wasn't that amazing. It was definitely a story full of, really prestigious things, I guess you could say, of the president's son and, the Prince of Britain. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really pushing the needle. Queer people deserve escapism in their films, right? Sometimes when I've watched movies, the thing that I've been trying to do when I criticize them is talk about how realistic they are or not realistic. And not that that's the wrong way to look at this film, but oftentimes I have to remind myself that people want to see idealized future sometimes. A lot of LGBT films do not have realistic premises, but they are depictions of queer people living functional lives and having a positive outcome. They're depictions of what could be. And I think the interesting thing about this film, where, the female president's son is in love with the British prince, I think that there's a part of me that felt when I was watching this that this almost feels like it's not realistic, but it's also not too far off from where I think we're close to. Does that make any sense? I don't think we're far off from getting a woman president. And I also think that if the president had a gay son, I don't think it would be so influential that people wouldn't vote for this candidate, right? So it's kind of interesting watching this because there's a lot of films that I've seen where I'm they're depicting this really idealized future, but I actually don't think we're far off from all the things happening in this film happening. And who knows, I've been disconnected from a lot of stuff, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm starting to feel a bit more hopeful about our future. You know, like right now, we're dealing with so much bullshit. We're dealing with so much antagonism against the trans community, against the gay community, against everybody, right? And there's a part of me that's inclined to believe that what we're seeing right now is the very last vestiges of all of these things, the, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. I feel like we're seeing them struggle and clawing and fighting to stay alive. And they might continue to. It might continue for a bit more, but I think it's on its way out. And what we're seeing now are the last ditch, desperate attempts to keep it alive. I could be totally wrong about that, but that is definitely how I've been feeling recently. The nagging thought that I had in the back of my mind as I was watching this movie is that this is yet another film where two conventionally attractive men fall in love, right? And I like that we're at a point where there's enough examples of that for it to feel like, it's been overdone. But I also was really curious how gay people related to this film and whether or not this felt like more of the same or it felt like something that was revolutionary. So I wanted to take some time to look into how gay people are responding to this film and all of the various aspects of it, and especially the racial sort of aspects of it. Shout out to my assistant, Alyssa. She did a lot of research and helped me out with this portion of the video. And she is awesome. And this is the first time you guys are really seeing research that she's done materialize in a video that I'm working on. So everybody thank Alyssa for the next portion of this video, because we're going to be diving in to the criticism the film has received and also some of the themes that people have been questioning and the complex history behind who wrote this movie. Because believe it or not, this movie is based on a book that isn't actually written by a gay man. So this film was actually a huge commercial success for Amazon. It caused a surge of new users who were specifically looking to watch this movie. It maintains a 7.2 rating on IMDb, and 32.6% of the people who voted for it gave it a 10-star rating. The reception of this film has been overwhelmingly positive, with high ratings on both Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. Like I said, this film is actually based on a book, and as with most book to movie things, there are quite a few people who prefer the book over the movie. But the book, or rather its author, has been the source of a pretty interesting debate. This film is based on a book of the same exact name by an author named Casey McQuiston. Casey McQuiston does not identify as a gay man. Casey McQuiston is an AFAB non-binary person who writes comedic romance about all people under the acronym. They've written stories about lesbians, about trans people, about gay men, and they like to make content that is comedic romance for queer people, the sort of stuff that they would like to have seen growing up. Now, looking at Casey McQuiston's history, it's pretty clear that this comes from a very genuine place of trying to insert representation for queer folks in the romantic comedy genre, and I think that that's amazing. But because Casey McQuiston is a non-binary AFAB person and not a gay man, they have been accused of essentially fetishizing gay men. Now, we'll get to this particular criticism later, but one major criticism of both the book and the movie is that it is essentially gay content made for straight women. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not Casey McQuiston, who is not a gay man and does not identify as a gay man, can accurately write stories about men falling in love. Now, when I found out about this, I kind of laughed because I filmed the introduction to this video before I found out anything about this. And I guess my excitement for this movie as a person who is not a gay man could indeed be read as like a straight woman being excited about gay content, right? You know, I'll be honest, when I was watching the movie, I did sort of get like yaoi vibes. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I'm a terrible former weeaboo kid. But I did sort of get like yaoi vibes. Like I was sort of like watching it and asking like, who's the yuke? Who's the seme? Do you know what I mean? Like it did to some degree give yaoi vibes. And the major criticism that some gay men have of yaoi is that it is a genre popular amongst usually straight women, sometimes queer women. And it doesn't often accurately depict relationships between gay men because it's specifically done for usually the female gaze. Not the female gaze, the female gaze, you know what I mean? So it was actually kind of funny to me to find out that this was indeed a comparison that other people had made. So to me, that tells me that there's probably something to that, but there are actually quite a few gay men who really did enjoy this movie. And I'd argue even more who really, really enjoyed the book. In fact, before the book was even published, there was a bidding war between companies about who was going to be able to actually produce the movie based on this book. And mind you, this book was published in May of 2019. Now, Amazon would ultimately win this bidding war and they would tap Matthew Lopez as director. Matthew Lopez is a gay man, and he told Teen Vogue that when he was looking at the book, he fell in love with the character Alex because the character is so similar to him, being a man who falls in love with a man and also has a mixed racial heritage. This was actually Lopez's film directorial debut. Up to this point, he's only done stage shows, and a lot of the stage shows that he's directed have touched on the subjects of race, sex, sexuality, gender, immigration, a lot of the themes that pop up in this movie. So when he was adapting this movie for the film, he actually did end up making quite a few changes, namely to Alex's character. In the book, Alex is in his early 20s and he's really still sort of figuring out his sexuality, and that is a really big part of his character. And for this movie, he wanted to make Alex a little bit older and to make it more about Alex just not yet finding a man who he has fallen in love with to the point where he would want to openly claim himself as bisexual. He wanted for Alex's love of Prince Henry to ultimately be the thing that allows him to understand himself as bisexual. On press tours, Lopez regularly corrected interviewers who would say that this was a story about two gay men because Alex is bisexual and Henry is a gay man. He would describe the decision to erase Alex's bisexuality as something that would be despicable. And he particularly wanted to portray a bisexual man in a relationship with a gay man to sort of show that that does indeed happen. Now, if you guys follow my podcast, True Tea with katblaque, which is on hiatus, it is coming back, but we will have it back in a different form. But I did a whole sort of call-in show about this. Some people's anxieties with dating bisexual people because they feel like they will always sort of default to the thing that society prefers, which is usually a straight relationship in quotations, right? But Lopez really wanted to depict that bisexual people can indeed fall in love with gay folks and have a happy, loving relationship. On a similar note, one of the major differences between the book and the movie is that in the book, Prince Henry has a mother who is an absentee mother, and there is a queen. These two characters are not in the movie at all, at least from what I saw and remember. They're completely omitted. And apparently in the book, when Henry was outed, his mother, who had been absentee throughout most of his life, decided to step forward to show support. And apparently this was one of the major things that helped with the royal family accepting him coming out. And in the movie, instead of that, what you basically have is the king seeing that public opinion has shifted and that maybe he doesn't need to be closeted anymore. It is a less interesting end, I will say. But the reason why Lopez wanted to make that change is because he wanted for Henry to feel like it was his decision to come out. Like it was he who had to stand up for himself, not somebody else standing up for him and giving him strength. So that change was probably made to address what might have felt like making the coming out of the character Prince Henry about something other than how he feels about his own sexuality. And I do understand that change. Matthew Lopez was pretty intentional in rewriting the characters in this way because he wanted for both Henry and Alex to feel like characters who had autonomy over their sexuality. He didn't like the idea of their coming out being for anyone other than themselves. Now, on the note about adapting from the book to the movie, I will say that one thing that I didn't love about the film is that it has a lot of area, like they go a lot of places, and it did sort of feel like they were really packing a lot of stuff in a short period of time. And that's to be expected with book adaptations for movies, especially when you're trying to get it all in one movie. Some people said that it would have been better as a show or as a series, but I don't know. I feel like this is as much as I really want to live in this universe. But, you know, they go to a lot of really interesting places. They go to Texas and Paris and London. Like they go to a lot of places, and it felt like they were there for one scene and then they left. And you never really felt like integrated into these places. I often felt like so much more could happen. And I'm sure in the books there is so much more. So that was kind of disorienting because you just felt like the characters were never in one place at one time. And obviously that makes sense for the first son and, you know, the Prince of Britain or whatever. But I would have liked to have seen what they could have done if they spent a bit more time sitting in those locations. So when it comes to how gay men feel about this film, there are obviously going to be divided opinions. When I was doing my research about how people responded to this movie, a lot of the criticisms from gay men fell into one of three categories. There are some gay men who felt that the film was just fun escapism. You know, two very good-looking men who are in some of the highest positions in the world meet each other, fall in love, and it is adorable, and they have their graphic sex scene, and it's hot. It's not that deep. And a lot of people liked that this film wasn't that deep because a lot of times when we have realistic portrayals of LGBT shit in general, it doesn't end positively, and it is always about, you know, the sad stuff. And this was just a good old time, a fun, good old escapist time, and that's as deep as it needs to be. Then there are some gay men who felt that the two main actors had absolutely no chemistry, and the premise of the film was so unrealistic that it was hard to keep them engaged with the film. And you know what? I kind of see this and I kind of don't. I don't necessarily think that the two actors had the most amazing chemistry. Like, I didn't necessarily like buy their relationship, if I'm being frank with you, but it was hot, but it was definitely hot. And I think that's kind of like enough, you know, like they're good looking and they're making out. And I guess that's hot on its own, but that's not the same as like these two actors having chemistry. And some people argued that the reason why these two actors don't have chemistry is because of the sexuality of the actors. Alex is portrayed by an actor named Tyler Zakar Perez, who has not explicitly stated their sexuality, definitely believes in keeping it to themselves. And obviously I understand why people would do that, but a lot of people feel like if you are gay, that would be awesome. If you're not, that's also fine. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like there's divided opinion about that. And obviously, I think there are some actors who don't want to voice their sexuality because it makes their job a bit harder. We'll get to that a bit later. On the other hand, Nicholas Galsantine, the man who plays Prince Henry, is straight and I believe has a partner currently. And all of this, of course, brings us back to the age-old question that we have in almost every LGBT blockbuster film that doesn't star LGBT people. Can straight people play gay roles? And, you know, I'm kind of divided on this in a way, because on one hand, I feel like we all understand and have sort of seen through the way that certain actors' careers have gone. Being out as gay does make your job harder. It makes you less likely to be booked. And even in some of the most famous LGBT pieces of cinema, the main actors behind these queer characters are not queer, right? So to me, that almost also says that even within the context of queer films, it's probably hard to get the job as a queer person, right? And so there's something to be said about that aspect of it. On the other hand, I feel like an actor's job is to act, and I feel like straight men can probably and should probably play gay roles. I think it's pretty cool that an openly straight man is so secure with himself that he can make that content. And mind you, in the past where there have been these characters played by people who are not gay, you saw everything about their acting except for intimacy, right? Like historically, when there have been gay characters played by people who are not gay, these are not gay roles where you see them actually intimate with men, right? A lot of times it's the cutaway into the whatever, like it's not actually depicted. And so I think it kind of says something that Nicholas Galsatine was able to do that and still be heterosexual and in love with who he's in love with. You know, I think that's pretty cool. And I don't know if discouraging that is a great idea. On the other hand, I can't ignore the obvious bias against actors who are gay, right? Even for roles where they are playing gay people. So I'm divided. Like I said, I definitely could kind of see how these two actors didn't really have like a bunch of chemistry. They're just both hot. And I think that that kind of leads into the third group of people that I saw. The third group of gay men who have criticized this film have essentially felt that this is just gay content made for straight people. And one of the main reasons people think that this is gay content made for straight people is the level of conventional attraction that both of these men have, right? Like, it's two hot dudes connecting. And obviously there's lots of gay men who like that, but is that the realistic image of most gay men? Probably not. Not saying most gay men are, I'm not saying that. Don't come for me. What I'm saying is there are a lot of gay men who kind of feel tired with that. They're kind of tired with this sort of synthetic portrayal of two men who are in love. It's clearly put together for certain gays, both G-A-Y and G-A-Z-E. And like, it's not necessarily realistic, right? It's not necessarily always realistic to portray this sort of dynamic as two just incredibly hot men getting together and doing what they do. And I do think there's something to be said about how when queer films are created to appeal to a larger audience, there is sort of this habit of peeling back a lot of slightly more risque but far more relatable things in order for it to have more mass appeal. So Matthew Lopez, when he was filming this, really wanted to put certain aspects of gay intimacy in the film. There was a conversation about whether or not they wanted to show Prince Eric, cleaning himself out before he does the do, right? There was a conversation about whether or not they wanted to portray him taking PrEP, whether or not they wanted to portray him doing safe sex practices, which I still believe is actually in the film. They wanted to do stuff that would be a little bit more on the nose for gay people to see and recognize when it came to the intimacy. Because again, one of the standard criticisms that a lot of gay films have gotten is that, especially when they star straight people, is that it shows everything but the intimacy, but the sexuality, but the sex and the connection in that way. And, interestingly enough, this film actually got an R rating because of the sex scenes. And there's something to be said about that, because frankly, while the sex scenes are hot, they're definitely not, in my opinion, that graphic. Yes, you know what they're doing, but it's not really much more graphic than a lot of other scenes that I've seen on CW, right? So it's strange to me that this has an R rating, but we already know that the company that does these ratings tends to be very against gay love and very against female pleasure. So, that's a whole other conversation. But long story short, there were people who wanted it to be a little bit more edgy and a little bit more real, and they struggled with this movie because they felt it was too synthetic. In an interview with Variety, Matthew Lopez told them that they wanted to do things that are a little bit more edgy and more relatable for gay men. But a lot of that stuff was not included. And one of the reasons they gave for that is specifically when it came to Prince Henry, they just thought that depicting that would be too disrespectful to the royal family. And I love that that's the line, because I'm pretty sure there is a Prince Henry. I don't really pay attention to the British monarchy, so pretty sure there's one that exists though. And I think that there is a debate to be had about whether or not this was a movie that needed that, right? Like, does this movie need a scene with him douching himself? Does this movie need a scene with him talking about PrEP, right? Does it? I don't know, but I do think that it would appeal more to gay men, and it would feel, even with all of its fluff, a bit more like it was made for gay men, right? So that's just something that I thought of. So there's a huge part of me that just found this to be a fun time, right? And I kind of find that that's more and more my approach to a lot of films, frankly, meeting it at where it's at instead of sort of seeing it as, not having everything that I want. Like, I'm not a rom-com person at all. I don't really even like comedy unless it's like Documentary Now or like some like extreme, very seriously done mockumentary sort of thing. This is not a film for me. I'm not the target audience, I think, for this film, but I still thought that it was fun. I thought that it was silly. And frankly, I kind of want to live in a time where people can make silly gay rom-coms. Even if I don't like them, even if they're like not my thing necessarily, I want to be able to have more of that. Please, sir, can I have some more gay shit? Please, sir, please. Sorry, I'm sorry for being all like anti-British or whatever. Anyway, all that aside, I think that there's some interesting questions to answer, and I'm really curious to know what you guys think about any of the following questions in the comment box below. Why do we need more realistic portrayals of gay men in the media? Do actors need to be gay or bisexual to portray gay or bisexual characters? Can people who aren't men who love men write stories about men who love men? And if not, why? If so, why? Is it enough, as I feel, to say that it's really amazing that we live in a time where a story about two men in love was so sought after that even before it was published, people were fighting over who gets to make the movie adaptation? Like, should we be happy here or should we ask for more? Is it enough that this was a gay film backed by a huge company with a lot of resources? Is it enough that it was so popular that it caused a surge in subscriptions just to see that particular thing? Like I said, for me, watching this was kind of interesting because it felt like a slightly unrealistic portrayal of things that realistically didn't actually feel that untangible, right? Like, I'm sure the woman's going to be president. I'm almost positive that one of her children is going to be gay, and I will be there at the White House standing on the on the grass, ready to, show my love and support, just like all those people. I think if you like silly CW-esque, romantic comedies, I think you'll enjoy this movie. I think that it's a fun time for what it is. I'm still really curious who the UK and Seme are, though. That's another question I want answered. Anyway, if you saw this movie, I would love to hear what you have to say about it. Please give me all of your thoughts in the comment box below. I know how y'all like to get down. I'm so excited to read the comments on this video. Thank you so much for participating in my community. And also, congratulations on being part of the 500,000 people who subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for supporting what I do and for liking my videos and enjoying my content. I'm sure people who have been following me for a while can tell that there's been a bit of shift in a lot of vibe. And girl, let me just tell you, the shift is coming even more. In fact, this video might be me testing the waters for a video format to come that I'm pretty excited about. So, and it's going to be so much bigger than this. Let's just tell you that. Thank you though for appreciating what I do on here. I really appreciate it. And I want to continue making cool stuff for you guys. So if you do enjoy my content, please support me over on Patreon. That is where I upload private vlogs every once in a while about what's going on in my life. I do, girl, we talk about all this shit. A lot of y'all, this is a side note, a lot of y'all were really helpful in the past couple of months because I've been dealing with my mother passing away and stuff. And so I've been venting, and a lot of people have left me really lovely messages on there. So I really, really, really appreciate you for that. But yes, Patreon is the way to consistently support me. It's going to be really helpful as I embark on larger, bigger, newer projects. Shout out to my assistant and my editor who worked on this video with me. Hi, Alyssa. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you guys so much for being awesome. And my Patreon people help me pay them. So thank you so much for that as well. Anyway, that's enough exposition. I will talk to you guys later. I want you to always remember and never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Except for Miguel. Miguel, you are a bitter queen. Hang it up, Miguel.